It is every police leader's responsibility to not only continually develop their own skills and abilities, but to prepare the next generation of leaders. Retired Captain William Frost helps you meet this task by providing a clear blueprint to follow in his book, Leadership in Law Enforcement. To learn more about his book and other consulting and training he provides, go to www.code33consulting.com. That's code33consulting.com.
Like I'm huge on training, right? And so I try it no matter what it was. I went to every single thing that they would allow me to go to. You're working for like the canine thing. I wanted the canine thing, but all those other classes helped me get that canine position.
Everyone's different. Everyone's an individual. And just because one counselor wasn't right doesn't mean that all the other ones are going to be wrong too. But at the same time, maybe yoga and getting out in nature and then talking to someone from your church, maybe that's like the right kind of fit for this moment.
Again, I also see people staying in law enforcement way too long because
Yep.
they can retire, but they don't because they just don't have a purpose, right? And so they're like, well, if I retire, what am I going to do?
Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. Today, we're going to be talking about wellness. We're going to be talking about wellness therapy dogs. We're going to be talking about training and how you bring that in, how you bring your people to training to spread these positive ideas in first responder culture and beyond. And I'm super excited to introduce retired Sheriff's Deputy Shawn Thomas. Shawn, thanks for coming on the show today.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No, absolutely. It was a while that I kind of saw what you're doing, and I was aware of all the work you're doing with the sheriff's office, and that you had a wellness therapy dog. And I was super intrigued because I think at the time that I learned about it, I was kind of new to the wellness game outside of just departmental peer support and trying to grow efforts and trying to grow awareness. So it's really cool to have been able to see that continue on and see all your work in and out of your actual employment, as you've retired. And we'll talk about first responder conferences and what you were working on back then and how it's continued to grow. And I want to nudge to that too, but all the things that you've done in your career and then to have been able to meet you and see more of that work up close, personally attending some of the conferences, I'm super excited to have you on for all those reasons.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I appreciate you having me, and I love talking about this because I'm super passionate about it. So whenever I get a chance to talk somebody's ear off, I love it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I know that this episode is going to be fantastic for a lot of people, regardless of where they're at in their career. As always, whether you're coming in and these are just the primers that are going to help you have a successful career, or you're transitioning towards retirement or transitioning out. I know there's a lot of retired folks that listen in, and it's all really validating to the stuff that they're trying and the stuff they're continuing to try to make that better, I suppose, balanced, because first responder work changes you. And I think that's the point of a lot of this. But there's going to be a lot of takeaways, regardless of where that's at for the listener and whether you want to build some of these ideas in your own department and agency. But if we could cut back a little bit more towards the beginning, Shawn, I'd like to ask you about what brought you into law enforcement and then whether wellness was always like an awareness for you or how that developed in your career.
Yeah. Well, my dad retired from the King County Sheriff's Office after 30 years. So growing up and around law enforcement is really kind of what piqued my interest and led me to the profession. So I think he was a reserve and back in 78 and then hired full time in 80. So yeah, it was just kind of a way of life for me. Like I was around it constantly and it was interesting. That's why I got involved in law enforcement. And I did the whole reserve route first just to see if that was something that I truly was interested in. And then I was hired full time in 97.
Nice. Nice. So growing up, do you have memories that were like, yeah, this is the thing, I want to do it? Or did you have, looking back, do you also have those other things that maybe you noticed in your own life that we know is pretty prevalent in first responder work, where it's really hard to balance family and emotions and things like that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't really understand everything. I mean, my parents divorced when I was like 8, and I didn't understand that whole dynamic until I got older. I think it had to do a little bit with maybe the profession and childhood trauma for my dad and things like that he just didn't get. And I don't even know if he still gets it, but over time, I kind of learned about that. Growing up, I, saw my dad. My dad was on the SWAT team, and, they would come to the house and dress up, and, I just thought that was kind of cool. And then he had some canine friends. And as soon as I got hired, I remember like pre-hirement, or like in the classes that we had, they said, well, where do you see yourself in 10 years or whatever it was? And I said, I definitely want to do canine, which I got a chance to do, explosive canine and a therapy dog. So that was kind of cool. And,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's just, I even remember, like, I think I was like 19, and I remember talking to my dad about, what do you do, like, when you see a child, like a SIDS death or something? And I remember him, and it's crazy that I remember this, but he would say, well, we sit down and we talk to each other, we go have a beer, because obviously peer support wasn't a thing back then. And I remember at that point thinking, that's crazy. Like, wow, like the things that they must see and how do they deal with it? And of course, I was younger and I didn't really know about counseling or any of the other resources that were out
Sure.
there, right? But I just thought that was crazy that, back then they didn't have anything. And look at what we have now. It's amazing that there's so many resources and programs for first responders. And I still hear some of those old, you know, guys and gals talk about how they had nothing. And so
Yeah.
I'm so
Yeah.
glad that we are to the point that we are, because as you know, we endure a lot throughout our careers. And if you don't process through it, then it just turns up in negative ways.
Yeah, well, at least, and I've heard a lot of retired service, I suppose, service individuals, whether it's military or whether it's first responders on the show, whether they were command staff or whether they were in whatever wellness initiatives that they had, say, "Man, I wish we knew better." And you guys are taking it off, and you're going the next step. But I think it's all part of a progression, and I want to say, like, at least for your dad, like sitting down with buddies and talking about it, because I think that's a really different paradigm than with the generation. A lot of people weren't talking about it. And so at least there was that. And then that was something to build upon where, there's definitely healthier and not as healthy, we'll put it that way, ways to get together and, talk about and have a beer. I mean, it's one thing to have a beer and decompress, and it's another thing to have, a dozen. So
Right.
and I've certainly been there, so it's not a place of judgment, in how we process grief and mourning and things like that, but at a certain point, we gotta walk it back and then check out some different, I suppose, coping strategies or healing mechanisms.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm not sure if I knew that you worked in explosives, dog. Can you tell me about that and how you got into that work?
Obviously, I wanted to be canine from the start. And, I thought, well, at that time, right, the only canine that I knew about was out doing patrol work and
Mhm.
going to do, because that's all that I knew about. Then when I was working in Metro, because I worked in our transit division, they hired an explosive dog because of terrorism. And so I thought, wow, that's the coolest thing ever, right? And so I tried to, those positions, there was like one in the whole department. And then when they hired two, I missed out on that. And then when they hired three, I got that dog, for Sound Transit. So, because Sound Transit obviously grew. It was a great job. I love that job. It was, getting to work with the dog every day. Although I will tell people that a lot of people are like, "Oh, how cool you get to work with your dog every day," and they fail to forget that it's a lot of work, right?
Mhm.
It's not just like, "Oh, I take my dog to work," and there's a lot of things that go along with it, and there's a lot of training. And I remember one day I came home and my husband said, "Why are you such a bitch?" And I said, "What?" I go, "You know what? I'll tell you why. Because every day I go to work and this dog comes with me. I can't go to the bathroom by
This
myself. I
dog.
can't do anything by myself. And I come home, you want something, the kids want something. I said, I'm never alone.
Me
I don't
time. You want that me time.
yeah, I
Yeah.
don't have any time to myself. And so that's why I'm such a bitch.
Mm,
uh, but but then again, it dawned on me, okay, so after that whole thing, we're like, okay, well, what can I do to make that better? And I said, you know what I could really use is when I come home, you take the dog and let me just decompress for like
mm,
5 minutes, right? Before
yeah.
I walk into the house and then deal with all this stuff because I just need some alone time. So, but then, that's just something over time that you figure out. And it took him to say that, like,
Yeah.
because I didn't realize that I was not pleasant when I came home, but
No,
we worked it out.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that because it is such a recurring conversation. I mean, if you scan through the prior episode titles for listeners, there's some that are very obviously talking about family dynamics and off duty stuff. And this is a frequent thing where we talk about how you got to talk about it. Like, you got to work through some of that stuff. Unfortunately, although I do nudge and a lot of guests do nudge to talk about that before it's a thing. I mean, we're first responders, right? And a lot of times you're juggling all these high priority things and then you're quickly just responding to things. And sometimes it does create that, or it does lead to that conflict or that discord before you iron it out. But you have the conversation and now your husband knew and then you knew and you had an expectation of what to expect and what was going to help that whole thing progress forward, as far as like you just coming home after a super engaging busy shift with a sidekick. That those dogs are working dogs. They're not usually easy dogs. It's not like, don't just plug and play your friendly mutt that's on the couch all day just staring at you waiting for a walk. It's like, no, they're sometimes so high energy, high responsivity that they need frequent and a lot of stimulation in the form of training and exercise and discipline.
Yeah. I mean, I still have him. He's 13
Oh, wow.
and he's
Nice.
and he's still a lot of work.
Wow. Yeah.
Because, he worked his entire life, right? And
Mhm.
he expected certain things, and so when you retire a working dog, it's a little bit different as well.
Mhm.
So, obviously we don't keep up on training or anything like that, but it's still he's very high demand and wants attention because he's been spoiled his whole life.
That's funny. I always wondered, with my generalist canine, Cato, when I was injured, he was, like, fine at home. He had to stay at home, and I was like, "Oh, he's gonna lose his mind." And he's, like, fine. And then when he was injured, he was in the crate, and he was fine. And then when I retired him, promoting a sergeant, like, he was fine. And I was like, "Man, maybe he's not that, like." And I know he's not that high drive in the spectrum, or he wasn't in the spectrum of working dogs, but yeah, such a different challenge. For those
Mhm.
people listening in that are earlier in their career that are like, "Oh my gosh, like detection dog, I'd love to do that." Did you have a familiarity with dogs before, or what are some things that you would recommend people do and start thinking about so they are ready for that type of work?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always had my family dog, and then I always had personal dogs when I moved out. So,
Mhm.
um, and then I did a lot of training. I didn't just get a dog and then not train it. So, a lot of training beforehand. The other thing was spending a lot of time with the handlers, right? Coring and working with, I mean, when I learned about the explosive dogs, obviously I try to learn as much as I could. I try to ride along with that person on my own time, right? It wasn't something that I felt like I needed to get paid because this was something important to me that I really wanted to do. So I try to log as many hours, learn about the job, read the SOPs, just, I would really try to start building your resume because, as you know, it's not an easy job to get and there's only a few positions. So I definitely would, and make sure that that's something that you really know what it's all about, right? Like I said, it's not just taking your dog to work and it's fun. It's a lot of work. And, I mean, if you have a busy family and now you're adding a dog and then what kind of dog is it? How are you integrating it into your family? Do you have a fenced yard? I mean, there's so many things to
Yeah.
think about. And then the other thing is what people don't think about is retirement, right? So when you retire your dog, some are high drive, some are more mellow. But I struggle even with, because he's getting older and he's obviously gonna die, and that's hard too, right?
Mhm.
So it's something like from start to finish that you have to think about, like, hey, are you prepared for this? Because it's not just a dog, right? It's a partner,
Yeah.
and so that's, it's hard.
Yeah. No, it's a lot. And we did have an older episode where Dr. Brooke came on. We talked about pet grief and integrating that with working dog grief because they are at that next level, right? Like you said it yourself, that your partner was with you essentially 24/7 and nobody else in the world is. You have your family that sadly went to put on the back burner at times because of the challenging nature of this work. You're spending more time with your colleagues a lot of times than at home because of the long shifts. But then you have this dog that's kind of the constant, and I think that that's what a lot of people recognize. It's that heaviness. But then also like there's that degree of, especially like an explosives dog or a generalist dog, like they're going to into really dangerous situations so that the humans don't have to, maybe, right? And so we recognize every time you deploy the dog, something terrible could befall the dog, but at the benefit of society and ourselves and our partners, which is also a heavy thing to grapple with as well. But yeah, thank you for what's your dog's name?
Seamus.
Seamus.
Yeah,
Nice. Thank you for Seamus' service and thank you for sharing about that.
of course. I have a flag just like you do. See?
Mm. Yeah, look at that. Shout out to, is that Noel? Is that Noel's
Yep.
flag? Of
No,
course.
well, it probably is. It was given to me when he retired, so I'm assuming
Mm.
it was. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair
Little
to
greenie.
assume. So yeah,
Mhm.
shout out to Noel, flags to remember. Okay, so explosive detection dog, high drive. Let's transition to wellness therapy dog. And how did that come about? And I mean, what are some of the differences for people that may be unaware?
Well, yeah, I mean, when I got our wellness position, I pitched it to the sheriff and nothing happened. And then I pitched it again a couple years back because it was the space that I love to be in. And so after I got the wellness position, then I said, well, what about the dog? I left the explosive detection world to be our wellness. What was the
Coordinator or
title?
officer?
Coordinator. Yeah. Wellness. Yeah. I can't even remember the title, but our wellness person. Right. And so obviously, I really struggled with that because I loved doing explosive detection work. I loved being a canine handler, but I also, wellness was something that I was working on in the department and peer support, and then outside of the department with the conferences. So I took a leap of faith and I went into that position, not knowing if it was going to be full time or part time. And then, I knew how valuable the dogs were and how I've had friends that had therapy canine dogs and other places. And I just thought, wow, this is a great opportunity for us to have and train a canine. And since I had been trained many dogs in the past, I thought, okay, well, this would be a perfect fit. Of course, the sheriff thought so too, and so we purchased the dog and we integrated the dog, and which was a lot of work because I got her as a puppy. Her name's Serena, and it was adding to the wellness position that I was currently doing, and then trying to train this dog at the same time. I think it was a lot. So obviously, that's something to think about if people are trying to move forward. Like if it's a full time job, especially if
Hmm.
you're a puppy.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, it was good. I tried to expose her into the different places and precincts that we had. Cause I mean, as you know, King County is a huge department. We have several different contract cities. And so it was, again, a lot for one person. But, people, we know how, if you're a dog person, that people do, or, dogs do calm people and help them relax and get
Hmm.
their minds off things. And so I think those programs, having a therapy dog into departments is amazing and beneficial for people that like dogs, right? Because not
Yeah.
everybody
Yep.
likes dogs. But I think, it's a good tool to help
Yeah.
calm and relax.
Yeah. No, it's really cool. I mean, there's so many perks and you see more and more departments coming on with a version of this wellness or therapy dog, right? Some are very internally focused and it's almost aligned with peer support and maybe debriefs, things like that. And then there's also this component of just like a station dog that may just be in an area and people can swing through and then they often do, or the dog kind of makes its rounds with the handler and you just see it. I mean, Hope Dogs have come out to our agency numerous times, and you just see people even if they're not like dog people that get down on their, stoop down and get all, up in the dog's grill. You do see a lot of people just their body language just shifts, like their shoulders kind of come back and their brow kind of unfurrows just because
Hmm.
they're not dealing with something, contentious out in the street. It's like we're back in the station. Now they have this dog that's like kind of just wide eyed looking at them. They're like, oh, hey, dog, how's it going? And then they come say hi. So it's pretty cool. And then also on the vulnerable victim side, and I know that this is a different wheelhouse, but sometimes there is kind of that hybrid dog that can do this working with a forensic investigator. But a lot of times when you have kids or traumatized victims, like I've heard the anecdotes like firsthand, secondhand for me, right? But like the people that are in the room in those interviews, detectives that are like, you would not believe how successful that breaking of the ice and that live kind of teddy bear situation can help someone through that really traumatic time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they can be used for several different things. Obviously, that's not what our dog was made to do or was, the reason why we got the dog. But yes, I think there's a lot of situations where you can use the dog for other purposes as well.
Yeah. So I heard persistence, which I love, and I think that that's a great note for anyone that's trying to bring in a new program or develop a program. Also heard exposure training for dogs specifically, so that's very wise for any type of working dog, right? Let them know what kind of environments they're going to come into and toggle that. Are there any common, I suppose, obstacles that you hear or you've heard, especially as you brought the dog on, that you could consider sharing with people that are maybe trying to build their program or build the legitimacy of their pilot program?
Yeah, again, I mean, I would definitely encourage people to look into what other departments are doing and then possibly spending time with them if they can, just to kind of see what the dynamic is. Obviously, the King County Sheriff's Office is large. So, Bellevue and King County, you really can't compare the two, right? So you would definitely have a different dynamic and what that would look like. So I would try to learn as much from a similar department and what they're doing. And then of course, like you said, you were talking about stations and fire stations, and there's people that have dogs at fire stations. I mean, it's different, right? It's not a one size fits all. You have to find
Yeah.
what works for you and what other people are doing, and then take those pieces and build your own program based on your department.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think that it's worth connecting these ideas on thinking about a program or developing one, or let's say the program exists and you want to be the next person, right? And taking a note from, as you explained, the explosives detection dog position, like all these things that you can do. You can train, you can learn, you can be knowledgeable, like pick brains, right? Before you just throw your name in the hat and you get it because you interview well and you're like, oh my gosh, what did I get into? Develop that. And I love how you even made the recognition that a lot of that was on your own time. And so this is where I actually want to bring it back to everybody listening for specialty regardless, because I think so often if we have a robust department with a good budget, then you look for opportunities to shadow and you look for opportunities to develop your career on the clock. And there certainly are opportunities for that. And I think that more departments should allow for those types of opportunities. However, when you bring it all back, like how bad do you want it? And put in the time, put in the work. And I think that that's going to help a lot of people through their career when they are trying to out hustle some other people. Like show you really want it and like do the work.
Mhm. Oh, I had a huge binder, like
Mm,
a huge binder that I put together that I spent hours and hours and hours on just because, I knew that there were a lot of people wanting that one position. And so, yeah, it, I mean, that's the other thing that I would recommend people do over time is keep track of your own training. Don't rely on anybody else to do so. Keep your certificates, do all that stuff, just so you can show, like, because at one point, you might be competing against numerous other people for one position. And so I think it's super important to keep track of that yourself and don't think that the department's going to have that information later on.
yeah,
I
yeah.
try to tell my kids that now. I'm like, everything that you do, make note of it, jot it down. And so, you can build your resume over time and show people what you're doing.
I think that's such a helpful note and a tip to kind of help articulate that and when you're in the process, whether it's a packet and or an interview. For me, I was fortunate that there were two spots opening when I put in, but there were like 8 or 10 of us that put in. And I
Yeah.
definitely didn't have the most time on. The other dude that got it with me, like super hard worker. And I think that that's what that's what uplifted both of us. Like, we were showing up a ton on our time on our time off. We were both super studious as well. And I had books, like I bought books, researched everything I could at the time, and then just showed up. And I think that that's the other side that some people don't get. They try to do what's on paper. I had one, I mean, there was one, I suppose, fellow officer that put in, and he had this log for multiple agencies, and he counted the hours he trained, and it was the most hours. And he was upset about it because he didn't get it. But the feedback I got as to why I got picked was because I had that grind where I was applying it to other things I was doing too. Like, I was not just in it for the process. That wasn't like what I was doing my whole 40 hours a week for. I was being a reliable teammate. I was a hard worker just in patrol in general. Like, I had a good reputation with detectives because I sent up decent cases or good cases at times. So it is the whole picture. And hopefully each selection process gets at that.
Yeah, sometimes those selection processes
Processes
process
or says, yeah, they're good. Tomato, tomato.
seem unfair, and but yeah, it's hard to dispute when you have that big binder full of stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
I felt like if I had all this information, I put all this time and energy into it, it shows how committed I am, and it's hard to say no to people that are putting all that time and effort into applying for
hmm
those positions that don't come available very often.
Yeah. Yeah. And you brought up a good note. And I think for listeners, everyone that listens into this show is trying to get better. No one, I have high confidence that no one's spending the time, the hours listening to Blue Grit Radio because they just want to be stagnant in their life or career. So ultimately, like, our selection process is subjective. Yes, because there are people, right? Even if you have scoring rubrics and all this, and you bring in an outside agency person to sit on a panel, it's still subjective, right? The final say, absolutely. So what I would
Mhm,
nudge people, because I've been denied things, I've put in for things and not gotten them, and I've certainly gotten things and looked at notes later, especially if it was civil service, or gotten feedback. And some of those things I didn't like what I heard, but you have to consider it, and that's how you get better. And so I think everything that you brought up as like really meaningful tips is, if people can look themselves in the mirror and be like, man, I worked as hard as I can, and I think I outworked everyone else. Also, I really do pay attention to communication and teamwork, and I prove myself an asset. Then you run your lap, you do your thing. And if you maintain a good attitude, don't get dejected, whether it's
mhm.
the next spot in that position or the next opportunity that aligns with your career and your desires, like, you got to be confident that that's going to pan out as it should. Um, it is tough, though. It's absolutely tough if you don't get it.
Yeah, one of the things that I recommend people do is take as many classes as possible. Like, I'm huge on training, right? And so I try it no matter what it was, instructor training, evoc training, communication training. Like, I I went to every single thing that they would allow me to go to, just because it's not just, you're working for like the canine thing. I wanted the canine thing, but all those other classes helped me get that
hmm
canine position, right?
Yeah.
So I encourage people to do that. The other thing is, you had asked me uh what I want to leave people with, and um I I encourage people to take those other things and learn different skills, just because if you get to the point where this job is not for you anymore,
hmm
I see so many people getting stuck, staying with in law enforcement, and then because they'll say, "Well, I don't know what else to do. I don't have any other skills." It's sad, right? Because then people are trading time for dollars, in something that they don't want to be a part of any longer, but they do it because they don't have a purpose or they don't have anything else to do. And then again, I also see people staying in law enforcement way too long because
Yep.
they can retire, but they don't because they just don't have a purpose, right? And so
hmm
they're like, well, if I retire, what am I going to do? At least, and now I'm coming to work, I'm getting up, I have a routine. So I really, eventually you want to retire. Like, I mean, I would think that everybody would want to retire, but
Yeah,
I,
that's the
I
goal,
feel
right?
like, especially with our profession, it's hard to sit still.
hmm
And a lot of us, navigate better with a full plate. And so I just encourage people to learn different skills over time and find something that you truly love after retirement, whether it's even, just a hobby, but just find something.
Yeah. I love that for a couple of reasons. One is that that's a tip I've been giving to more officers in one-on-ones, or it's come up here a couple times where I invite people, especially earlier in their career, to not fixate on the role. Like, oh, what specialty do I need to do? And my sergeant's asking me like what I want to do, and I want to have goals. That's great. However, specialties change really quickly, and their scope changes because of technology and the times. At the same time, if we can recognize that you want to build towards something, focus on skills, and that's what Sean's talking about. So I love that because it translates. Like if you work on your communication skills or certain aspects of your investigations game, those skills can be applied to any facet in law enforcement or outside of law enforcement, right? Like critical problem solving, uh, developing, learning new information systems, whatever. Like it's super translatable. So have that abundant mindset, think broadly, and then listen to your gut. Like when you learn about something and it really like perks your brain and you try to get curious and it almost feels effortless, like you're just hungry to learn, you're curious to look up stuff on your phone all the time about it, like listen to that. And there's
Yeah.
network, talk to people. It's never been easier to network through LinkedIn, connecting with a ton of people, whether they're cops or ex-cops. Like people are super supportive, especially in that transition out of law enforcement.
Hmm.
Um, Shout out to Jess with Next Shift. Like that's her whole project. So a lot of times we don't get to choose when we're done. But I like a lot of this mission for Blue Grit to be helping cops be their best for as long as they choose to be in the profession, and then far beyond that.
It's easy to get bored in a position, right?
Hmm.
And so I feel like I'm always trying to, even now, educate myself on whatever I can. I was telling my oldest kid yesterday, I said, man, I this Microsoft Word thing, I just wish I knew more about Microsoft Word, like how to, I said, if I just maybe I should sit down and just take a class and learn more. And, I mean, it's
There's so
obviously
much in
help.
there. Yeah,
Yeah.
like Office, all like PowerPoint, like Excel scares me. But yeah, like there's YouTube. Like as you say that, I've had the same thoughts. I'm like, if I just spent 20 minutes here and there, I'd learn a ton
Yeah.
for free.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. So Sean, tell us about first responder conferences. What was the genesis of that? And tell us about what you've been learning and how it's been growing.
The whole reason for the conferences, or well, not the whole reason, because it was supposed to be a one and done, and now we're getting ready to do 53 conferences. But
It's amazing.
in 2006, I became a member of our peer support team. So that's when I started responding to the critical incidents that our deputies were involved with and helping them and their families through that process. Fast forward to 2015, my husband had been on the SWAT team for about 18 years, on the department for about 27 at that point, was undergoing some organizational stress as well as cumulative stress, and was coping with alcohol. And it got to the point where he said, I need help. And I said, great, now what? I didn't feel comfortable reaching out to reaching out to the department, sorry, asking for help. So I searched and found a confidential resource, and we found him the help that he needed. But during that whole process, I realized if we're both first responders and we don't know where to get help, there's got to be other people out there.
Mhm.
So my peer support captain at the time knew what we had been through, and it was suggested that we organize a mental health and wellness conference for first responders and their families. And I thought, well, sure, how hard can a conference be? Uh, then I realized it was a lot of work, but we had around 150 first responders attend, and at least 5 people after the conference reached out for some type of assistance. So it was clear to me at that point there's a lot of first responders that were suffering in silence. And I knew my department really didn't have any proactive wellness programs at the time. We had peer support, but it was more reactive than proactive.
Mhm.
And I started talking to other first responders around the country and found that this was true with their departments as well. So a couple of friends from different states knew I had put the event on. They asked if I could come put one on in their area. So I just tried to move forward with the local boots on the ground folks to make that happen, because every time we had a conference, people were telling us how beneficial it was. And then I started getting phone calls with people telling me that it saved their life. So therefore, I became really passionate about it, kept on moving forward. And like I said, now we're getting ready to do our 53rd conference. And we just keep on getting asked by agencies and organizations wanting to make wellness a priority to come to their area and organize a conference there.
Yeah, I love that. It's helping people at scale on this crazy level. Uh, Even with what you just said, what perks into my mind is one of my personal mantras that I try to integrate in with Blue Grit, and it's serve the need. Like there's a need, and you talk about purpose, right? Like what greater purpose than to help this community that is frequently struggling, even and alongside the emerging awareness and tools and resources. Like we just need more, right? And so I'm really glad to see how much it's progressed even in the time I've been on, and then hearing about people that have come before me and how much it's grown since then. But then I just get excited when I think about what continues to happen and how people like yourself are laying the groundwork for so many more people to bring that back, right? Like take that torch and run with it to keep elevating these really critical conversations and needs for our community.
Yeah. I mean, I just, you have to take care of yourself, right? The department, that's not their job. The department's job is to pay you a paycheck. Real that's the only thing they owe you, right? So, I mean, I would hope that they would care about you, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying that at the end of the day, it's a job, and it's not their job to take care of you. You need to take care of yourself and your own wellness. And so, the reason why I love these conferences is because it's education that I know departments are doing a better job and they're integrating wellness programs. But like I said, I always like to learn. And I go to every one of these conferences, and I can tell you that every time I go, I learn something new. And there are so many different resources out there for first responders that, I mean, I had no idea. Um, I mean, it's grown over time, and there's a lot of people that are doing good work and supporting first responders. And so I think that's awesome. Um, but every day I learn about some new resource or what people are doing. And again, it's not a one size fits all. You have to find what works for you.
Hmm.
And that changes over time too, right? So, before people are like, oh, well, I need to go to counseling. And if counseling doesn't work, then I quit. Right. I
Yeah.
mean, it's more than counseling. I mean, I've gone to a lot of counselors over time, that have helped me. But you know, it's not something that you may need for your entire life, right? Like
Hmm.
I mean, some people need yoga, some people need meditation, some people do ketamine, or I mean, it depends on who you are and what you're looking for and what you need. And so exploring your options, that's what we're trying to convey, is you need to explore different options and find what works for you.
Yep. So well put. And there's a couple things there that I kind of want to focus in on. And one is that what you just said, everyone's different, everyone's an individual. And just because one counselor wasn't right doesn't mean that all the other ones are going to be wrong too. But at the same time, maybe yoga and getting out in nature and then talking to someone from your church, maybe that's like the right kind of fit for this moment. And then it might get you through and help you build, and then maybe you revisit therapy or group therapy or all these different modalities and all these different kind of resources. So I love how you focus back in on that. And yeah, there's so much good work that's being done. I really appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate you coming on and also kind of highlighting, in a conference, how you bring all these different resources together. And there's vendors that come and talk about what they're doing. People can kind of go off to the side at breaks and at lunch and learn more at a booth, get a flyer, get some information. But then also the speakers, like it's just very a range of speakers from their personal experiences, trauma, resilience through stress. And at the same time, people are working with these large agencies that are, again, helping people at scale, right? They're traveling around, maybe they're local. So a whole a whole smattering of things, especially if people are unsure. You're not just signing on for one idea. That's what's really cool, I think, about the conferences too, is that you are getting this range of things. And I've had a lot of officers come back and say, like, I was super intrigued by these two things. And it really caught them off guard. It's not something that they went thinking that they'd learn about or thinking they'd be intrigued about, but it is that awareness of information can be so helpful.
Well, I appreciate you, saying all of those nice things. I mean, we truly are trying to help as many people as possible. This is not a job for me. It's, something now that I'm doing in retirement that's keeping me busy. I get to continue to serve the community that I was in for so long. And
Hmm.
so I know some people are like, oh, I hate when people say I'm truly honored, but I really am honored to be able to work with so many great people and move in the right direction.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Shawn, thank you so much for your time talking about your career, talking about wellness in your own family and yourself, and then what you've been able to learn and share with people. Can you please tell people how they can get in contact and or learn more, maybe get on the mailing list for first responder conferences?
Yeah, so our website is so the number one,
Hmm.
strc.org. So they can go to our website. We have a list of all of our upcoming conferences. I think we have 5 conferences that are open registration right now. We have 10 conferences planned this year. Each conference is a little bit different. So even if you went to the same conference, you're going to hear different speakers. It's just, we try to use local and national speakers at our conferences. It's 2 days. Again, it focuses on overall wellness for everyone, including fire, police, dispatch, corrections, military, veterans, spouses, clinicians,
Yeah, spouses. Yeah.
chaplains. Yeah, so we like to include everybody. But yeah, I mean, if they want to learn more about us, just go to the website. They can contact us there, and yeah, and if they have a great resource, or want to speak, we have online speaker forums, we have volunteer forms, we have resource partner information. So anything that they're looking for, we would love for them to be a part.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much, Shawn.
Thank you.
Hey, Grit Nation, I got a couple things I'm really excited to share with you. The first is that the newsletter, free newsletter, is now live. All you got to do is go to bluegritwellness.com to subscribe. It is basically a summary of everything good and gritty for the week, including some exclusive content specifically on the newsletter. That'll include wellness information, nutrition, things that you ask, Q&A, as well as updates about Blue Grit, offerings, news, things that'll help you out. Next order of business. For years, I've been asked what kind of nutritional supplements I use because I've been into learning about health, nutrition, fitness for so long. And for years, I landed on NutriCost. And it's only a recent thing that I've been an affiliate, but now I get to pass the savings on to you. So if you go to NutriCost.com, use code BlueGrit, that's just BlueGrit, you get 10% off. Literally just a couple items, you get free shipping. And the reason why I found it was because it was always the best quality for the best value. So I always recommend people look at the ingredient list, look out for things like sucralose. It has the lowest amount of unnatural ingredients if you're looking for that kind of thing, whether it's your whey protein isolate, which I toggle on and off of, or organic vegan protein to cut down on different chemicals that I just generally like to avoid. It's not just protein, it's creatine, and minerals, vitamins, things like L-theanine and magnesium, which I use regularly to help my nervous system power down. It aids rest and recovery, promoting better sleep. So whatever it is, go to NutriCost.com and you can just enter the code BlueGrit to get your 10% off. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.